all conflict comes from some kind of human emotion that is a derivation of fear.
Welcome back to NeuroConversant Leadership, where we talk about effective communication and leadership, especially in the STEM workplace. I'm Jeremy Doran, and I'd love to help great engineers become great leaders. Today, we have a special guest, Ursula Taylor. When you look at her profile, it has her listed as an evolved litigation attorney. Ursula, welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for having me today.
Oh,
Yeah.
we're thrilled to have you. I'm hoping you can explain a little bit more of what that means.
Of course. So my background in training is as a lawyer, a litigation attorney. I built a niche expertise in healthcare and managed care. And I say evolved litigation attorney because I'm not quite ready to let it completely go, because I remain dedicated to helping people resolve disputes in the most efficient and sustaining ways possible. And I think my background in litigation in terms of understanding those costs and the benefits and the risks and the uncertainty is extremely helpful in the work that I do today. But what I do today is, or how I got to where I am today, is basically I've always been an intuitive person. I've always been someone who's really just aligned with my clients' overall business goals and objectives. And nobody's in the business to win a litigation or win a fight, right? It's more of a side thing that comes up. It drains businesses and leaders from what they really want to do. And what I came to realize is that the machinations of litigation or alternative dispute resolutions, like arbitrations, really don't address conflict at its source and really aren't efficient or particularly effective at getting my clients from point A to point B in terms of resolving the problem and moving on to what they really want to do and what they're in the business to do.
So as a novice, can you explain to me the difference between arbitration and mediation?
Sure. So arbitration is basically a kind of a somewhat of a judicial process. It's somewhat akin to a judicial process with a court, except you're hiring an arbitrator and it's based in contract. So your contract with another party will have what's called an arbitration clause, and it basically says any disputes would be submitted to a binding arbitration. And sometimes they're confidential, but you're essentially hiring and paying a trier of fact or a decider of your dispute, an arbitrator. Mediation is a formalized dispute resolution process where you basically retain a mediator to help you resolve your dispute. And it's similar to what I do. And people often ask me, so are you a mediator? And I'm a little slow to adopt that label because I think that what I do is very different than a traditional mediator. I believe in my experience as an attorney, as a litigation attorney, what mediators often do is come in when the parties have sort of engaged in enough cost and expense and enough litigation process to get to a point where essentially the fear of losing or the fear of a protracted continued expense of litigation, the fear of something they can't control outweighs whatever fear had them in litigation to begin with. So I would kind of liken it to if you're on a battlefield, let's say a war, right? So litigation is a war, and both sides are so bloodied and bruised and beaten up that they're ready to say, okay, fine, let's engage in mediation. And mediation would be like the paramedic that runs in and picks the bodies off the ground. It's not really resolving what had them in the dispute. It's not really addressing that underlying fear. It's sort of, we can't tolerate this anymore. Somebody come in and help us just hammer out a number or a ceasefire kind of resolution.
So it's not making anything better. It's just stopping things from getting worse.
Exactly. Yeah. So I hesitate to just label myself as a straight up mediator.
So then what is it you do that's different than that?
So what I do is I bring a more holistic sort of approach to conflict resolution, recognizing and honoring that all conflict comes from human emotion. All conflict comes from some kind of human emotion that is a derivation of fear. So scarcity or fear or pride or guilt or some denser lower emotion. and in formalized dispute resolution processes, whether that's an arbitration or a court process, there's absolutely no space to find your fear, to identify your fear, to figure out, to build awareness around those fears, to figure out who the humans are that are holding that fear. It's really facts, laws, and arguments which keep us away from that awareness, keep us distracted, and actually cause the conflict oftentimes to just perpetuate and amplify.
So, sort of a counselor for the two sides.
Sort of a counselor, yes. Bringing a little bit of what we know from mental health modalities into dispute resolution.
And you work with both sides?
I can work with both sides.
Okay.
Oftentimes I work with just one side, and oftentimes that's enough, actually, because what has us in a dispute requires two parties. When one party has sort of built some awareness and gotten some clarity about what's at stake, we can oftentimes come up with the strategies and the paths to at least mitigate the dispute, make it less protracted, and get some clarity around more efficient paths to resolution.
I have to imagine that earlier on, someone like you gets involved, the more readily it can come to a good conclusion. Is that accurate?
Yeah, or at least helping people understand what's at stake, helping people understand, like, okay, here are your options. Sometimes I refer to myself as a bit of a litigation doula. So helping people see the bigger picture in terms of the human emotion, and also just very practically, all right, this is what's going to happen if you do file suit, or if you do go this path. This is the likely costs that are associated. It's really not that hard to do a litigation budget, to provide that education. It just doesn't often happen.
I'm interested in what parallels you see just in conflict within the workplace between maybe two different leaders of different divisions or within one group. What sorts of parallels do you see, and what sort of advice can you give to help resolve conflict there?
Absolutely. And I actually really appreciate and enjoy helping leaders and teams before there's a conflict, tension navigation, or conflict mitigation, or conflict avoidance. And I think there's a number of strategies and advice, but I think the most critical thing is self-awareness, having some awareness of ourselves and the things that are coming up. I think that in our world, we're often taught that the way to get what we want is to affect or control other people. And actually, the first step is always to have some introspection and some self-awareness. Earlier, I was saying that all conflict comes from some fear-based emotion. So getting a handle on what's coming up for you in terms of whatever that fear or scarcity or pride or whatever it is, getting some awareness around that first and foremost is what is going to help you be able to navigate any tension or help you communicate more effectively with the other person.
Is that something most people can notice for themselves, or are there any steps they can take to look for what is in the background?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think it all comes back to mindfulness. I think sometimes slowing down, giving ourselves the space to notice. And then I think the best thing you can do is just feel into your body. What are you feeling? Where do you feel some tension? Is it your shoulders, your head? Is something feeling tight, or is there a pit in your stomach? I think just bringing some awareness to our physical body is the first place where we can start to sort of become aware more broadly and generally about what we might be holding energetically or emotionally.
Getting that space and time to actually do it can be a challenge, especially once some sort of conflict has happened. Are there strategies for just, like, taking a time out?
Yeah. I think asking for a break, asking for a timeout, just having that quick conversation with yourself, like, okay, I'm feeling a little amped up or a little bit maybe dysregulated. But old habits die hard, right? And for many of us, we're programmed to just sort of act and react and react from sort of that fear-based energy. So it is about slowing down and sort of reforming our habits in terms of taking that break, asking for that space, coming up with the strategies to feel into our bodies and gain self-awareness. That's how we're going to become the persuasive and effective communicator and the leader who can not only resolve conflict, but navigate those tensions and avoid conflict altogether and bring that learning to your team as well.
Two things that I will often recommend to people are relax your stomach, because when we get tense, we like kind of pull our stomach in. And if you can relax that, I think that it goes a long way towards putting your body where it's supposed to be. And then just deep breaths. Deep breaths do a number of things. When you breathe deeply, it kind of triggers your body to think that it's time to relax a little bit more. And it
Mm-hmm.
just gives you a little bit of time to stop and say, why am I so mad about this?
Right, right. Yes, I think those are great strategies. Deep breaths, relax your stomach. And what it also does is it gives that momentary pause to get us out of our head, right? So when we're sort of in our brains and our egoic minds, we're kind of operating out of habit, we're operating from reaction, we're not taking that beat to get a little bit of distance from ourselves. But that deep breath or feeling into your body, feeling into your stomach creates that little pause.
Is there anything that you recommend we can say to the other person? If I know that I'm getting amped up and I need to step away, what would you recommend I say to the other person to try and help resolve things?
Right. Well, boundaries are really important, but that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because, in actuality, we're always looking for that one liner, that those words, that script, if you will, that we can just say, and it'll make it better or make it go away. But my work is based on an understanding that it's less about the words themselves than the energy and intention that underlies the words. You can say, I need a break, or you can say, I need a break, you know? So when we can build some self-awareness of what's going on for us, we can emanate a different energy and intention. There's no set of words, there's no line. It's all about our own internal energy that then emanates out and affects the other person. So the first step is our own self-awareness in that regard.
How often do the other person really accept the intention? Because there have been times when I've told people that I'm not asking you this question to try and win the argument. I'm asking you this question because I really want to know what you think. And they frankly don't believe me. They think that I'm just
Mm-hmm.
going to use it. So how do you, as a person, make it very clear what your intentions are? And as the receiver of that, stop yourself and try to actually receive it as intended.
Sure. I mean, that's a great question too, and two parts to that. The first thing to know and understand is that our energy is infectious, right? We know this from quantum physics that like energy attracts like energy. Subatomic particles are attracted to other subatomic particles vibrating at the same frequency. Our energy, our words, and our thoughts, and our choices have an energy too, and we affect the energy of the people around us. So when we can have a more grounded, centered, I call it a heart-centered sort of intention, that's the most important thing we can do. And then the second part is that sometimes that's not enough. If the other person is really kind of dysregulated or in their own head and isn't able to receive it, then you may just need to take a break and resume the conversation at a different point in time, and then really try to harness your own higher energy and intention, and note when you fall off, note when you get triggered, and have your own self-awareness in that way.
My mother raised 10 of us, so she got pretty good at managing conflict because there's a good amount of conflict. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing that she would very often do is the more heated things got, the softer she would speak and the more slowly she
Mm,
would speak. And most people
mm,
tend to do the opposite. They tend to speed up and get louder. By doing that, I think she got all of us to just sort of simmer down and start listening a little bit more.
She sounds like a wise woman. I'm a parent, and for those of us who are parents, we can see and experience that. Like when we want our children are fighting or they're agitated or dysregulated. The worst thing we can do is jump in the fray with our own agitated, dysregulated energy and try to like resist and fight back. That tends to just kind of, if you have children like mine, make it worse, if you will.
Going back a little bit, you mentioned that boundaries are important. You didn't explain much of that, and it seems like strong boundaries might be kind of like a border, which causes more conflict. Can you explain why boundaries are important and how they help mitigate it?
Yeah, boundaries also come back to self-awareness. Boundaries are really important, and I like to talk about compassionate boundaries. So at the core, it's our own self-awareness of our own emotional energy, and then being able to ground into ourselves and be able to see when someone else is dysregulated, be able to see when somebody else is wanting to perpetuate a drama. I mean, we can feel it when our friend or our neighbor is just wanting to vent, if you will. And it's really easy to be recruited into their energy. It's really easy to start to absorb it. It's really easy to start to become part of the drama. And what we really want to do when we think about compassionate boundaries, if it's somebody, attacking us or coming at us with antagonistic energy or speaking about some other situation that's maybe not directly related to us, in either scenario, it's really important to hold space and have compassion, but not absorb the energy. And a simple, I hear you is enough. Having self-awareness, being connected to ourselves, feeling your stomach, as you mentioned, or being in our body, and not absorbing their energy, but having compassion. What we're wanting to do is help that other person, if we can, get to the emotion or the feeling or really the energy that is underlying their words. And sometimes we can do that and sometimes we can't. Sometimes their words are triggering to us. Sometimes we can't help but absorb it. But there again, it's just maybe it's a break, a discontinuing of the conversation, coming back later when we can kind of cultivate a different energy and intention.
I like that. And it's similar to what I talk about with empathy and sympathy. You should be empathetic. You should understand the other person's. That doesn't mean you need to agree or feel what they feel. People mistake the two things very often, but empathy is very important. Sympathy can be a slippery slope.
Right. I like that. It's true.
As mentioned, we deal a lot with people in the STEM space, like engineers, etc. Have you found a difference in, say, someone who is very logical, which most science people tend to be more logical when getting into a conflict versus people who tend to be more emotional and or when there's one of each in the fray?
It can be an interesting challenge for sure. And I think if you're more of a logical or transactional kind of person, I think that's okay. It might mean that you've got to be a little bit more direct with yourself and also the other person. You can always ask if you don't know. I mean, I think it's really important that we don't assume. We don't assume that the other person's upset. We don't assume why they're upset. We don't make a judgment or an assumption about what's going on. Just ask. There's a lot of power in just an open-ended question that begins with how or what. How did we get here? What do you need? How do you feel? What can we do? These kinds of questions do a couple of different things. First, they help the other person feel heard by giving them that space. You're also avoiding assumptions and judgments and ideas that you're sort of supplying yourself from maybe your own insecurity. They help the other person feel heard. You avoid those assumptions and judgments, and you slowly start to tear down the walls too. You create this path for awareness, for sharing, for more of a reciprocal energy exchange. So the power of how or what, and you just ask, how are you feeling? What do you need? What's going on with you? How can I help? There's a lot to that.
This is wonderful because you are saying what I say all the time. Stop making assumptions because we all
Hmm.
do it, and just stop and ask the question. But it's so hard sometimes to stop and ask the question because you feel like you know the answer, but you
Hmm.
have to stop yourself.
Right, right. If you ask the question, you not only make sure you get real information, but you give the other person the opportunity to feel heard. There's a lot of power in that question that goes both ways.
And I found that once you're willing to ask questions and hear them out, they're much more willing to ask you questions and understand your point of view.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One thing that you had written is that there's no such thing as specialness. And
Mm.
I'm really curious if you can explain that to us. And
It's a great topic. We might need more time, but yeah, there's no such thing as specialness. This idea, and it really starts to upset a lot of systems and structures in our society when you unpack it and you take it all the way. But there's differences. We're each different. There are no two humans that are the same. But this idea that we rank above or below each other is really just a manifestation of fear. It's a manifestation of our own insecurity, and it's another space to have some self-awareness. Because when we operate in this idea of specialness, we're really operating from separateness, right? We're operating from this idea that we're separate, or I mean, that is the foundation of war and really what's killing our humanity. But if we can cultivate an ideology of oneness, of community, we're much more likely to not only resolve and avoid conflict, but really realize our fullest potential, because we're no longer operating from this idea of unworthiness, essentially.
that's so interesting. I just finished a book called The Year of Living Constitutionally by A.J. Jacobs. And he talks about the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights were not intended the way we take them now. They were not individual rights so much as community rights. And we have gone so far in the personal rights, which gives all of us a feeling of we are special and have the right to do this thing. And one thing he talks about is they really had an assumption that there were responsibilities that go with those rights. So it was about building a community and making the community stronger. That's what the rights were really designed to be, not so much the I'm special and I have these individual rights.
That's so interesting. And that really is the path for realizing our highest potential, and the path for realizing prosperity and abundance and what we all want is understanding ourselves as unique creatures with strengths and unique characteristics in a community of everyone working together in a sense of oneness.
I like it. What is a thing that we haven't talked about today that is right on the tip of your brain and you'd like to share with everybody?
That's such a great question. I mean, I think it's there's nothing that's on the tip of my brain that we haven't touched on, but it's just a re-emphasizing and confirming that, strong leadership, strong communication, tension avoidance, and conflict mitigation really starts with self-awareness and introspection.
And are there, other than in the moment, are there any exercises people can do to help strengthen their overall self awareness?
I mean, any kind of mindfulness. And I do some meditation, but that can look different for different people. You don't have to sit for an hour every day like a Buddha. But anything that helps you get out of your mind, out of your thinking mind. We have this misconception that we solve our problems by applying more and more of our thinking mind. And it's actually getting space from that, whether that's meditation, walks in nature, exercise, or playing, maybe doing a puzzle, doing a a puzzle, whatever can help us get present and out of our mind, because that then creates some space between our thinking mind and what's not our thinking mind. And what's not our thinking mind is the part of us that can get awareness of, that can help us have awareness of more of those fear-based emotions.
Yeah, there's so much processing power in our unconscious brains. And if we can shut off the conscious brain for a little bit and let all that power in the background do some of the work, you can very often get to a much better solution. They've done studies for idea generation, and if they gave someone 4 minutes to come up with however many uses for a piece of paper, people could come up with about 4, maybe 5. If they had them do it for 2 minutes and then stop and do something similar and come back and do 2 more minutes, they got to like 6. If they had them do something completely different in the middle, just absolutely change what they're thinking and the way their brain's working, and then come back, they got to like 9.5.
Wow.
So the ability to like stop the train, get off it for a little while, and then come back is so powerful.
That's amazing and not surprising.
So as we start to wrap up, what are some ways that people can reach out to you and learn more about what you do?
Sure. Yeah. Visit my website, conflictreimagine.com. You can shoot me a message through the website, or I believe my email is available there too, Ursula@conflictreimagine.com. Be happy to chat with any of your audience members at no charge. Just have a conversation about any actual or potential dispute that might be coming your way. Yeah, happy to be a help.
Who are typical clients of yours?
I love that question because it's really anybody who prioritizes their own personal or professional goals or objectives over being right. Being right, over being right, over being a victim, over winning, over punishing. Someone who just wants to get back to the thing that they love, that they're here to do, that inspires them. The people who want to prove themselves, be right, make someone else wrong, and are really in that space are going to have a harder time. But I mean, I'll help anyone who's willing and open to applying more holistic strategies to conflict resolution is someone I'd be happy to talk to.
Nice. All right. So now my 3 favorite questions. What is a place you have traveled to and loved, and a place you've not yet been but want to go?
I just recently traveled to Ecuador and I loved it. It's such a small, beautiful little country with so much to offer. The Pacific Ocean, the rainforest, the Andean mountain region. It is truly beautiful. The place where I would love to go, I have never been to Japan, and my daughter really wants to go. I'd love to take my daughter to Japan.
Nice. Who do you think is a great communicator, whether someone we all know or just in your own personal life?
I mean, I think my 8-year-old son is a great communicator because he's just like, I believe children are just so raw and pure. Small kids, they're not as their brains are not as garbled in the egoic sort of like fear-based ideas and structures that we come to adopt as adults, and that they just are who they are and they say what they need. So I love communicating with children.
It's surprising how many people have said children on this. And one was talking about, just what you said, that children are more pure. And I wonder if that's where the word adulterated come from. So children are unadulterated because they haven't become adults yet and gotten all the mishigash in there.
Exactly.
And then lastly, what's one piece of communication advice we can all benefit from?
I love being direct. Don't be afraid to be direct. Don't be afraid to say what you mean what you say, with self-awareness and with compassionate boundaries. But I think directness really pays off.
Wonderful. Ursula, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thank you so much for listening to NeuroConversant Leadership. If you found this beneficial, can you do me one small favor? It'll be quick, I promise. Can you go and give this podcast a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever it is that you listen before doing anything else? Unless you're driving. If you're driving, then I need you to keep driving. And then when you're done and parked, then go ahead and give me a review. Hopefully 5 stars, but whatever you are comfortable honestly giving. Thank you and have a great day.